We're canceling your anniversary dinner. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, said the moment I answered the phone. Brianna needs us. Behind me, the rich aroma of roasted garlic and rosemary drifted from the oven. 40 handwritten invitations sat neatly stacked on the marble countertop next to 2 chilled bottles of vintage champagne. I had already paid a non-refundable deposit for the private dining room at the Grand Oak, arranged transport for relatives, and spent weeks balancing my clients' tax filings just to clear this single weekend. What happened this time? I asked, my voice flat. She had a fight with her boyfriend. Evelyn replied, her tone sharp, demanding obedience. She is emotionally falling apart in her apartment. You need to understand. Before I could breathe, my husband, Julian, sent a text message. You're the strong one, Clara. You'll understand. We have to go to her. That single sentence had erased my birthdays, my career milestones, and every quiet promise we ever made. But to understand how this final betrayal shattered a decade of silence, we have to go back to 3 hours before that phone call. The rain beat a steady, relentless rhythm against the tall glass windows of our suburban Atlanta home. It was 5 p.m. The kitchen was filled with the warm, buttery scent of baking bread and the sharp, clean fragrance of fresh-cut white lilies. For 6 months, I had saved every spare dollar from my independent bookkeeping business to fund this evening. It was supposed to mark 5 years of marriage to Julian, and my 30th birthday, a double celebration I had meticulously planned down to the last detail. I stood before the hallway mirror, smoothing the fabric of a deep emerald silk dress. In the reflection, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes carried the soft, gray shadows of perpetual exhaustion. For 5 years, I had worked 14-hour days, balancing the books for local bakeries, auto repair shops, and florists. I managed our household budget, paid off Julian's old college loans, and kept a running tally of every family expense. Yet, in this house, I was invisible. I was the reliable background noise, the safety net that caught everyone when they fell, and the ghost who cleaned up the mess afterward. The floorboards creaked as Julian walked into the kitchen, his silk tie hanging loose around his collar. He didn't look at my dress. He didn't look at the flowers. His eyes were glued to his vibrating smartphone. Julian, I said softly, stepping into his line of sight. The reservation is for 8 o'clock. The car will be here in 2 hours. He didn't answer immediately. The sharp click of his thumb against the screen echoed through the quiet room. Evelyn just called, he murmured, his voice lacking any trace of excitement. Brianna's lease renewal came through today. Her landlord raised the rent by $400. She's locked in her bedroom, crying. She says her mental health can't handle the stress. A cold stillness settled in my chest. Brianna is 24 years old, Julian. She lives in a luxury high-rise downtown because she refuses to get a full-time job. What does her lease have to do with our dinner? Julian finally looked up, his brow furrowed in mild irritation. She's my sister, Clara. She's fragile. You know how sensitive she is. Mom says if we spend money on a lavish dinner tonight while Brianna is suffering, it will ruin the family dynamic. Ruin the family dynamic. I repeated the words slowly. They felt heavy, taste-testing the bitter salt of an old, familiar lie. I paid for this dinner with my own earnings. I booked this 3 months ago. You don't need to get defensive, he sighed, stepping closer and placing a heavy, passive hand on my shoulder. You're always so logical, so rigid. Money comes easily to you because you're good with numbers. Brianna struggles. Why does everything have to be a competition? Before I could speak, my phone chimed on the counter. It was a push notification from my banking app. Transaction alert. $3,500 debited from account ending in 4082. My pulse spiked in my ears. A loud, rushing thud. Account 4082 was my business reserve account, the money I set aside for tax payments and quarterly software licenses. I had given Julian joint access 2 years ago for emergencies, like unexpected home repairs or medical bills. I opened the app with trembling fingers. The payee line read, Oakwood Heights Apartments, leasing office. Did you just transfer $3,500 to your sister's landlord? My voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the hum of the refrigerator like a blade. Julian flinched slightly, but his defensive posture returned instantly. It was an emergency, Clara. Her landlord threatened eviction notice by midnight. Mom asked me to cover the back rent and the deposit increase. We'll pay it back. We. I asked, or me. You haven't contributed to that account in 8 months. Why are you making this about money? He snapped, his voice rising. Brianna is in a dark place. You have a stable job. You have savings. You don't need a fancy dinner to prove we're married. You are strong enough to handle a postponed celebration. She isn't. Then came the phone call from Evelyn. The loud, sharp demand through the speaker. The dismissal of my time, my labor, and my presence. And finally, Julian's text confirming that my place at my own table had been traded away for another person's manufactured tragedy. I stood alone in the kitchen as the oven timer began to beep, a shrill, rhythmic scream that filled the empty house. The smell of roasted garlic turned sour in my throat. I looked at the 40 invitations. I looked at the emerald dress. In that quiet, suffocating room, something inside me didn't break. It snapped clean. I walked over to the oven and turned it off. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Julian back. I didn't text Evelyn. Instead, I called the manager of the Grand Oak. Good evening, Marcus, I said, my voice steady, stripped of all emotion. I need to transfer my private dining reservation tonight. Do not cancel it. I want you to give the table, the food, and the wine to the family currently staying at the local shelter down the street. Tell them it's fully paid for. I hung up. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom. I pulled a single hard-shell suitcase from the closet. I didn't pack everything. I took 3 sets of practical clothes, my laptop, my financial ledgers, and my external hard drives. I walked down to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank portal. With 5 precise clicks, I removed Julian's joint access from my primary business accounts. I transferred my remaining personal funds to a new, independent bank account at an institution he had no record of. I picked up my suitcase, walked out to the garage, and threw it into the trunk of my sedan. Rain washed over the windshield as the engine roared to life. I pulled out of the driveway without looking back at the dark, silent house. I drove north, away from the city, toward the Chattooga River, toward the small, isolated lake house my grandfather, Arthur Pendleton, had built with his own hands 40 years ago. My family believed I would cry, calm down, and return in 3 days like I always did. They believed my strength was a tool for them to use. They were wrong. As the city lights faded into the dark, misty pine forests of northern Georgia, I didn't feel heartbreak. For the first time in 5 years, as the rain drummed against the roof and the cool night air filled the car, I felt the cold, sharp air of freedom. The tires hummed a low, hypnotic tune against the wet asphalt of Highway 441. Rain clung to the pine needles overhead, dripping in heavy, rhythmic splashes onto the hood of my sedan. It was 2:30 a.m. when I turned onto the narrow dirt driveway leading to the lake house. My mother had always called this private road unsafe and impractical. Growing up, she discouraged me from visiting unless the whole family came. She said Grandpa Arthur was stubborn, secretive, and obsessed with old grudges. Yet he had been the only person who never called me strong when he really meant convenient. The smell of damp earth decaying pine needles and cold lake water rushed through the vents as I killed the engine. The lake house stood dark against the ink-black water of the Chattooga River. Old oak trees wrapped their heavy, moss-draped branches around the porch roof like protective arms. As I opened the car door, the porch light flickered on with a sharp snap. A tall man in a dark wool coat stepped out from the shadows into the yellow light. A silver briefcase sat beside his polished boots. For one irrational second, my heart skipped a beat. I imagined Grandpa Arthur standing there in his faded plaid shirt, holding a mug of black coffee. But the stranger was younger, with clean-shaven jaws and sharp, analytical eyes behind thin wire frames. "Clara Vance," the man said, his voice calm and steady against the sound of rustling leaves. "I'm Marcus Vance. No relation, though your grandfather often joked we shared the same stubborn bloodline. I was Arthur's estate attorney." I stepped onto the damp wooden steps, key in hand. "Did my mother send you here?" "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," Marcus replied, holding up a leather folder. "Arthur told me you would come tonight, exactly 3 hours after your 30th birthday began. He predicted your anniversary dinner would be canceled. He predicted Evelyn would manufacture a crisis to keep you away." A cold wind swept off the water, carrying the sharp scent of ozone and wet timber. "He predicted that." Marcus unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The smell of cedar, beeswax, and old paper filled the foyer, the exact fragrance of my childhood summers. The floorboards groaned beneath our boots as Marcus led me into Arthur's private study. Nothing had changed. His brass reading lamp rested beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. A framed watercolor I had painted at 12 years old stood prominently on the mahogany desk. The polished, airbrushed family portrait my mother forced everyone to take was nowhere in sight. Marcus placed the leather folder on the desk and opened it. Inside lay thick parchment pages bound with red ribbon. "Arthur died 8 months ago," Marcus said, clicking open a fountain pen. "Your mother told you he left behind a decaying cabin, useless land, and mountains of unpaid debt. She repeatedly urged you to sign paperwork to sell the property to a resort developer and split the funds between Julian and Brianna. She said the legal filings were still tangled," I whispered, touching the edge of the desk. "She lied," Marcus said flatly. "This is Arthur's final will, signed 2 years before his death. He left the lake property, 20 surrounding acres of protected woodland, and controlling interest in Pendleton Fine woodworking to you. Full ownership transferred to you the moment you turned 30. My stomach tightened. What about my mother? She claimed she had administrative authority. Marcus opened a second folder, filled with bank statements, marked with red highlighter. Until tonight, Evelyn held temporary power of attorney solely to manage maintenance expenses and pay property taxes. Over the last 2 years, she systematically drained the operating account. He turned the pages toward me. The numbers blared in harsh black ink. She withdrew over $350,000, Marcus explained, his index finger tapping the paper. She labeled the transfers as emergency repairs, legal fees, and structural preservation. In reality, that money paid Brianna's luxury apartment lease, cleared her credit card debts, funded 3 failed digital marketing startups, and reserved a wedding venue for a relationship that ended last month. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. Did Julian know? Julian signed 3 authorization forms as a witness, Marcus replied. Evelyn used his signature to validate her access. To cover the remaining deficit, she applied for a home equity line of credit using the family house as collateral, forging your father's old signature records. And the land? I asked, my voice barely audible. A commercial consortium offered $2 million for the shoreline, Marcus said. Evelyn intended to sell it. To do that, She needed you to sign a 5-year extension on her power of attorney tonight. That is why Brianna's breakdown was manufactured. They needed you exhausted, guilty, and distracted. Below the bank statements lay a piece of heavy cream cardstock. The handwriting was jagged, bold, and unmistakable. Clara, my grandfather, had written, "They taught you that strength means surrendering what is yours. It doesn't. Strength means protecting what matters, even when the people demanding your sacrifice share your blood." Beside the note was a small wooden box. Inside were dozens of charcoal portraits, watercolor sketches, and a childish blueprint for an art center beside the lake, all drawn by my 10-year-old hands. Underneath them lay bank receipts from 20 years ago. When I was 12, Arthur had set aside an art scholarship fund for me. My mother withdrew it to pay for Brianna's private school tuition after Brianna stole an exam paper. When I was 16, my mother closed my first design website, claiming it violated tax rules. In truth, Brianna had complained that my sales made her feel inadequate. My mother had converted favoritism into a systematic financial policy. Marcus looked up from his papers, his eyes cold and resolute. As of midnight, Evelyn's authority has expired. The bank accounts are frozen. You hold full control of the Pendleton estate. Now, Clara, you decide. Does this remain a quiet family betrayal, or do we turn this over to the state prosecutor for fraud? I looked at Arthur's handwriting. I looked at the lake glowing silver under the moonlight outside the window. The fatigue in my bones vanished, replaced by an icy, crystal-clear focus. "Freeze every account," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet house. "Revoke her power of attorney. We are done protecting people who spent decades destroying me." The next morning did not begin with tears. It began at 5:30 a.m. with the sharp, crisp slap of cold lake water against my face. I established a brutal, unyielding discipline at the lake house. Every morning, before the sun crested the misty pine ridge, I ran along the rocky shoreline of the Chattooga River. The cold pine air burned my lungs. The steady crunch of gravel beneath my running shoes drowned out the lingering echoes of Julian's voice. I stopped eating skipped meals and cheap takeaway. I cooked fresh vegetables, drank black coffee, and reclaimed my body from years of neglected fatigue. Within 4 weeks, the gray shadows under my eyes faded. My spine straightened. The soft, timid posture of a woman trying to shrink herself vanished. By 8 a.m. each day, the study smelled of sharp espresso and printed paper. I enrolled in accelerated certification programs for forensic accounting and certified public accountant credentials. Numbers had always been my language, but now I weaponized them. Priya Shah, a sharp forensic auditor recommended by Marcus, joined me at the mahogany desk. For weeks, the blue glow of dual laptop screens illuminated our work. We traced $350,000 line by line. We matched fraudulent maintenance invoices to luxury boutique purchases in downtown Atlanta. We tied bogus structural repair fees directly to Brianna's credit card payments. While Priya and I pieced together the financial evidence, my phone buzzed constantly on the corner of the desk. Julian called 4 times a day. Brianna sent dozens of text messages that shifted wildly from sobbing pleas to venomous accusations. "You're destroying this family over a dinner party," Julian wrote one afternoon. "Mom is sick with worry. How can you be so cold? You always thought you were better than us," Brianna texted an hour later. "You're holding a grudge because nobody paid attention to you." I read the messages without flinching. Their guilt-tripping tactics, once my greatest weakness, now felt like predictable script lines. On a rainy Tuesday during the 6th week, I turned my attention to Grandpa Arthur's old desktop computer in the study. Working with a data recovery tool, I extracted archived local files and deleted email threads from the hard drive. At 11:15 p.m., a recovered thread appeared on the screen. The timestamp was dated exactly 3 days before my canceled anniversary dinner. The email was sent from Brianna to Evelyn. "Are you sure this will work?" Brianna had written. She already paid for the restaurant and booked the photographer. What if she refuses to leave? Evelyn's reply arrived 6 minutes later. "She will be angry, but she always comes back to clean up. She feels responsible for everyone. Once she arrives and sees you in distress, she will sign the POA extension to keep the peace. We can replace the account funds later after the land deal closes." Brianna responded. "And what if she asks about Grandpa's company?" Evelyn answered. "She doesn't even know she owns it." I stared at the glowing blue screen until the letters burned into my retinas. The air in my throat turned to frost. Brianna's mental health crisis was not a sudden tragedy. It was a planned, calculated distraction. They had deliberately ruined my 30th birthday and my 5th anniversary, knowing I would be exhausted, vulnerable, and desperate to restore harmony. They had counted on my empathy to strip away my inheritance. I stood up from the desk and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside, moonlight sliced across the black, turbulent surface of the lake. The last thread of emotional attachment inside my chest snapped cleanly in two. I felt no sorrow. I felt no urge to scream or demand an apology. Revenge delivered in anger is just a warning. Revenge delivered through cold precision is a verdict. I picked up my phone. I unblocked Julian's number and dialed. He answered on the second ring, his breath hitching with sudden hope. "Clara? Thank God. Where have you been? We've been terrified." "I needed time," I said. My voice was low, smooth, and stripped of all warmth. I sounded exhausted, exactly as they expected me to sound. Julian exhaled heavily through the receiver. "I know things got out of hand, but we're family, Clara. Mom wants us to have dinner this Sunday. Dad wants to settle the paperwork regarding Grandpa's property. It's just simple administrative stuff. Please come home." Not an inquiry about my well-being. Not an apology for the stolen money. Just the paperwork. "All right," I replied quietly into the dark room. "I will be there on Sunday at 6. "Thank you," Julian breathed, relief flooding his voice. "I knew you'd do the right thing." "I always do," I said, and ended the call. I lowered the phone and looked at my reflection in the dark window pane. The woman standing there was no longer the unseen wife who begged for a seat at her own table. She was an auditor preparing to close a fraudulent account forever. On Sunday at precisely 5:58 p.m., I pulled my sedan into the asphalt driveway of the suburban house I had shared with Julian. The evening air felt thick and humid, carrying the heavy scent of cut grass and impending rain. I wore a tailored midnight blue blazer over a crisp white silk blouse. In my right hand, I carried a black leather portfolio containing 2 months of meticulous forensic labor. Marcus waited in an unmarked black SUV parked 2 doors down, his phone connected to mine on a silent line. Julian opened the front door before I reached the porch steps. He looked tired. His eyes were bloodshot, his polo shirt unwrinkled but slightly oversized, as if he had lost weight from anxiety. "Clara," he breathed, stepping forward to embrace me. I extended my arm, placing my gloved palm flat against his chest, keeping a strict 3 feet of distance between us. Inside, Julian. He flinched, his jaw tightening, but he stepped aside. The foyer smelled of lemon polish and scorched sugar. In the dining room, Evelyn had arranged a grotesque imitation of a celebration. A cheap grocery store sheet cake sat on a silver platter under 31 lit candles. An extra candle, she later explained, so we could celebrate next year early. Brianna sat at the head of the dark mahogany table. She wore an oversized pastel cardigan draped loosely over her shoulders, her hair artfully messy, her eyelids painted with soft pink shadow to emphasize a fragile, tear-stained look. Evelyn stood by the sideboard, pouring red wine into crystal glasses. "There she is," Evelyn declared, her voice ringing with forced cheerfulness. "Our strong girl returned home. Let's handle the administrative housekeeping first, so we can enjoy dessert." She slid a single stapled document across the polished wood table, placing it next to a gold ballpoint pen. "It simply extends my administrative oversight of Grandpa Arthur's lake property until the estate probate clears. Just sign on the yellow line." I didn't pick up the pen. I pulled out a dining chair, sat down, and opened my leather portfolio. "Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the air conditioner like a cold wire. "Did you read this document before you asked me to come here?" Julian shifted his weight from foot to foot, avoiding my eyes. "Mom understands legal and property matters better than I do. Clara, it's just routine." "That wasn't my question," I said. I looked directly at Brianna. "When did you learn that Grandpa Arthur left the development company and the lake property exclusively to me?" Brianna's delicate posture froze. Her eyes darted toward her mother. Evelyn stepped between us, her fake smile instantly vanishing. "No one knows what Arthur intended toward the end. He was old, confused, and bitter. He passed 3 independent cognitive evaluations during the year he amended the trust." I replied flatly. I reached into my portfolio, pulled out 4 bound stacks of paper stamped with red forensic audit seals, and slid them across the table. 1 stack stopped in front of Evelyn, 1 beside Julian, and 1 before Brianna. $416,820, I stated. The numbers echoed off the high ceilings. "That is the exact sum transferred out of the estate operating accounts into accounts controlled by Evelyn Miller and Brianna Miller over the last 24 months. Evelyn's face was drained of color. Julian picked up the first page of his stack. By the 3rd page, his hands began to tremble. "Susan, Evelyn," Julian stammered, staring at his mother. "What are these wire transfers to Oakwood Heights leasing? That money belongs to this family." Evelyn shouted, slamming her hand onto the table. The crystal wine glasses chimed sharply. "Arthur created unnecessary divisions. I was protecting our future." "Whose future?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "You were preparing to sell protected preservation land to a commercial resort group to cover the illegal debts you accumulated." Brianna suddenly stood up, her chair screeching violently against the hardwood floor. "Stop acting like you earned any of this," she screamed, her fragile persona crumbling into raw rage. "Grandpa gave you everything because you manipulated him. You visited him every weekend while I was trying to build a career." "I visited him because he was dying," I said, staring into her eyes without blinking. "And you only called him when you needed a check." I pulled out the final sheet of paper, the printed email recovery log from Arthur's desktop. "Julian, read page 3 out loud," I instructed. Julian's eyes scanned the printed email thread. His lips moved silently before he spoke, his voice cracking. "She'll be angry, but she always comes back. Once she signs the revised authorization, we can reimburse the account later. She doesn't even know she owns it." Julian dropped the paper as if it had burned his fingers. He turned toward his mother, his face pale with disgust. "You canceled her anniversary dinner. You staged Brianna's eviction crisis just to get her signature." "I was preventing her from making an impulsive financial mistake." Evelyn barked, her eyes wild. "No," I said, standing up and buttoning my blazer. "Tonight, you listen to me." The room went dead silent. The smell of burning candle wax from the melting cake filled the space. "The Lake Estate accounts are frozen," I declared. "Evelyn's power of attorney is legally revoked. The land sale is canceled. Every fraudulent invoice, forged HELOC loan document, and wire transfer has been certified by a forensic CPA and preserved. I placed 2 business cards on the table next to the untouched cake. You have 2 choices, I said, my voice steady, rhythmic, and absolute. Choice 1. You return every recoverable dollar, surrender all claims against Arthur's estate, and sign a written admission of financial fraud prepared by my attorney within 48 hours. Choice 2. I authorize Marcus Vance to deliver this portfolio directly to the state prosecutor and the district attorney's financial crimes unit. Evelyn let out a harsh, bitter laugh. You would send your own husband's mother to prison over money? No, I replied, looking her straight in the eyes. Your own decisions will. Brianna kicked her chair backward. You're destroying us. You don't even need that money. You aren't sorry, I said, looking at Brianna, then at Julian, then at Evelyn. You are just terrified because the bank account finally closed. I turned on my heel and walked toward the front door. Behind me, Julian didn't follow. Evelyn began screaming at him, and Brianna started sobbing uncontrollably. As I stepped out onto the porch, the cool night rain hit my face. I drew a deep, clean breath of fresh air into my lungs, pulled the door shut behind me, and walked toward my future. The fallout did not arrive as a violent explosion. It descended like a slow, crushing winter, freezing everything my mother-in-law had built on deception. Within 72 hours of my departure from the dining room, Evelyn attempted a frantic maneuver. She tried to transfer the deed of the suburban family home directly into Brianna's name to shield it from upcoming asset discovery. That reckless move triggered an immediate fraud red flag at the regional bank. The house carried an active home equity line of credit, the very loan Evelyn had obtained using forged signature records. The bank froze all linked accounts overnight. Mortgage auditors began asking pointed questions that Evelyn could no longer silence with polished excuses. Within 4 weeks, the pristine image Evelyn had cultivated for 30 years fractured before the public eye. She was not a celebrity, but social standing governed her entire existence. She chaired charity committees, hosted annual galas, and lectured local women on fiscal responsibility. Marcus and Priya delivered our certified forensic audit to the board of directors at the Atlanta Children's Foundation, where Evelyn served as senior treasurer. The records revealed 3 separate estate wire transfers used to cover gala expenses where Evelyn had publicly claimed sole donor credit. The board requested her immediate resignation. When the local newspaper ran a quiet notice regarding pending civil litigation and financial irregularities, her social circle evaporated. Friends stopped answering her calls. Country club memberships were revoked for non-payment. The woman who valued public reputation above honesty was forced to watch her carefully constructed facade crumble into dust. Evelyn eventually accepted a pre-trial civil settlement to avoid criminal indictment. She surrendered her personal investments, liquidated her luxury jewelry, and turned over every asset purchased with stolen estate funds. The bank foreclosed on the family home. She moved into a cramped, 1-bedroom basement apartment across town, taking a part-time job as a clerk in a small insurance office. Julian's collapse was quieter, but equally complete. After discovering his mother's emails and the forged loan documents, he finally moved out. He rented a bare, furnished studio near the highway. He gave Marcus full access to his tax returns, joint bank statements, and old text logs. His cooperation did not erase 5 years of passive neglect, but it revealed the depth of his own denial. He had handed his financial life to his mother because confronting her was uncomfortable. He had called it family loyalty. The law called it negligence. One crisp October afternoon, Julian drove up to the lake house alone. The autumn leaves burned bright orange and crimson against the blue water. He stood on the gravel driveway, looking older, thinner, and hollowed out. "I should have stopped her, Clara," he said, his voice barely louder than the wind rustling through the pines. I kept telling myself Brianna needed help. "You knew helping her meant stealing from me," I replied, standing on the porch steps with my hands folded inside my blazer pockets. "You never fell apart," he whispered, looking down at his worn leather shoes. "I thought you were invincible." "Being stable is not an invitation to be robbed, Julian," I said, my voice calm, even, and unyielding. "Regret after exposure is not the same as a conscience before it." He flinched, nodded slowly, and handed me a small manila envelope containing his signed divorce decree. He turned around, got back into his sedan, and drove away. I didn't watch him reach the main road. Brianna suffered the harshest collision with reality. With her mother's financial pipeline severed, her lifestyle collapsed within days. Her landlord terminated her luxury apartment lease for unpaid back rent. Her leased sports car was repossessed from the curb. The high-end venue for her fictitious destination wedding kept her deposit due to false financial declarations on her application. She took a job as a host at a busy downtown diner, standing on her feet for 8 hours a day in a black apron. She moved into a shared basement flat with 2 college students. For the first time in 24 years, Brianna learned the exact cost of a gallon of milk, an electric bill, and an hour of honest labor. 3 years after the settlement, a thick envelope arrived at the lake house postmarked from Chicago. Inside was a handwritten letter from Brianna, accompanied by a cashier's check for $1,200, a small fraction of the money she had consumed. "I saw the original bank records last week," Brianna wrote, her handwriting small and unadorned. "I saw the art scholarship fund Mom took from you when you were 12. I thought I was fragile, but I was just greedy. I used being weak as power. I don't expect you to call me your sister. I just needed you to know that I am paying it back, dollar by dollar." I read the letter under the warm light of Grandpa Arthur's desk lamp. I placed the cashier's check into the foundation's scholarship account. I kept the letter in a file drawer, but I did not write back. An apology can be genuine without creating an obligation to reunite. True forgiveness does not mean granting people access to your life again. Meanwhile, my own transformation accelerated with methodical precision. I passed my CPA board examinations and earned my Master Analyst in Forensic Accounting certification. I officially converted Grandpa Arthur's lake property and the old woodworking shop into the unseen No More Foundation, a fully funded residential retreat and financial literacy center for women recovering from economic abuse and domestic control. We restored the original cabin, built 6 private solar-powered artist studios along the ridge, and constructed a timber-framed exhibition hall overlooking the water. We launched a fully funded scholarship program for adult women who had abandoned their creative and professional aspirations because their families considered their dreams impractical. I named the flagship residency program the Strong One, not because strength requires endless silent sacrifice, but because real strength begins the moment you refuse to play the role assigned to you. My days were no longer filled with the quiet desperation of balancing other people's debts. I woke up at dawn, ran along the riverbank, managed the foundation's growing endowment, and returned to my own art. My new paintings focused on light filtering through dark waters, vibrant, bold, and free. I had stopped begging for a seat at a table that was built to consume me. Instead, I had built my own. 10 years after the night my anniversary dinner was canceled, the lake house property no longer resembled the neglected cabin my mother had tried to sell. The original cedar home stood at the center of the grounds, surrounded by 6 solar-powered guest cabins, 2 shared art studios, a timber-framed community kitchen, and a glass exhibition hall overlooking the protected shoreline. Hundreds of pine trees rustled softly in the evening breeze. The scent of wood smoke, roasted pecans, and wild jasmine filled the warm summer air. It was my 40th birthday. Over 200 people gathered along the illuminated stone pathways beside the water. Resident artists displayed unfinished canvases inside the open-air studio. Local high school students pinned charcoal drawings to temporary cedar exhibition walls. Musicians played acoustic guitars near the restored flower garden. Former scholarship recipients returned from across the country, sharing stories of creative careers they had once feared pursuing. At the center of the exhibition hall stood a long banquet table crafted from reclaimed oak. Wildflowers rested in hand-blown glass vases alongside glowing candles. For most of my life, birthdays felt like delicate negotiations. I had learned not to ask for too much, invite too many people, or appear too excited. Happiness had made Brianna feel excluded, and her discomfort had always become my responsibility. At 40, standing under the warm amber lights of my own hall, I finally understood the truth. Joy does not require permission from those who benefit from your disappointment. At 7 p.m., Marcus Vance stepped onto the timber stage. Now retired, he wore a tailored gray suit and carried a sealed metal cylinder. The room quieted as he placed a laptop onto Grandpa Arthur's mahogany desk at the front of the hall. 10 years ago today, Arthur Pendleton left a final sealed instruction. Marcus announced, his voice echoing clearly through the speaker system. The release date is tonight. He required a sealed video recording to be played in the presence of his family. Near the back of the hall, 3 figures stood in silence. Julian had arrived first, looking older, his hair silvered at the temples, his posture humble. Brianna stood beside him, dressed in a simple navy linen dress, her expression calm and guarded. Evelyn had arrived last, wearing a plain gray coat, her silver hair pulled back, her eyes fixed on the floor. No one embraced. Marcus pressed play on the laptop. The large projection screen behind him flickered to life. Grandpa Arthur appeared on the screen, wearing his faded plaid flannel shirt, sitting on the porch of the lake house under a bright afternoon sun. "If you are watching this," Arthur began, his deep, rasping voice filling the hall, "Clara has reached her 40th birthday. Enough time has passed for consequences to reveal character." The crowd watched in breathless silence. Arthur described how Evelyn had redirected family resources toward Brianna for decades. He described how Julian had surrendered responsibility to preserve temporary peace. He described how Brianna had used instability as influence, and how Clara had been rewarded for competence with abandonment. Then came the final secret. The Pendleton estate originally contained a separate, sealed contingent trust worth $1.5 million, Arthur revealed, looking directly into the camera lens. "I intended to divide that fund equally among Julian, Brianna, and Evelyn on Clara's 40th birthday. If they respected the property transfer, allowed Clara to lead without manipulation, and honored her boundaries." A sharp, collective gasp rippled through the hall. Evelyn's lips parted, but no sound came from her throat. However, Arthur continued, his eyes cold and unyielding. "If anyone concealed the inheritance, misused estate operating funds, forged documents, or pressured Clara to surrender authority, the contingent fund would be permanently revoked. Every dollar would transfer directly into Clara's foundation for the artist's retreat." The screen went quiet for 2 seconds before Arthur spoke his final words. "Evelyn, you believed you protected your younger daughter. You did not. You taught her that love removes consequences, then called Clara cruel when she refused to keep paying for them. Julian, silence is still a decision. You cannot surrender authority and later claim innocence because someone else used it badly. Brianna, pain deserves compassion, but pain is not ownership. Your sister's joy was never evidence of your neglect. And to Clara, their regret does not purchase your return. You owe them honesty, not access. Build the place we imagined. The screen went dark. Evelyn whispered hoarsely into the quiet hall. He set me up. Brianna turned to her mother, her voice firm and steady. No, Mom. He gave us a choice. You sacrificed Clara, and you made me dependent on you so you could feel needed. Julian did not argue. He walked out into the cool night air, without saying a word. Evelyn followed him slowly, her shoulders slouched, realizing that her original theft of $350,000 had cost her family another $1.5 million. When the crowd thinned near the end of the night, Julian returned briefly. He handed me a small velvet box containing the original place card from my canceled 30th birthday dinner, the one he had retrieved from the restaurant 10 years ago. I kept thinking there would be a way to repair that night. Julian said softly, "There wasn't." "No," I replied gently. "There wasn't." "I know," he nodded, his eyes filled with quiet acceptance. For the first time in his life, he did not ask me to comfort him. Brianna stepped forward next. She handed me an envelope containing another cashier's check. "It's more than last year," she said. "I got promoted to manager at the restaurant." "Congratulations," I said. The word was genuine. "Do you think we'll ever be sisters again?" she asked quietly, looking out toward the dark water. "We are sisters, Brianna," I answered, my voice calm and peaceful. "That doesn't automatically mean we have to be close. Trust takes years of consistent choices." She accepted my answer without crying, arguing, or playing the victim. It was the first true sign that she had finally grown up. As midnight approached, the last guest departed. I walked out to the edge of the timber pier during the golden hour of late summer night. Golden lanterns cast warm, shimmering reflections across the tranquil water toward the protected forest shoreline. 10 years earlier, I had arrived at this lake with one suitcase, believing I had lost my family over a canceled dinner. In reality, the cancellation had exposed a structure built on my obedience. I had not lost my family that night. I had stopped losing myself. I turned back toward the entrance of the exhibition hall. Next to the doorway, I framed Grandpa Arthur's final handwritten note alongside a new line I had added myself. "Strength does not mean surrendering what is yours, and being family does not exempt anyone from the consequences of taking it." I stood under the warm glow of the porch light, listening to the soft rustle of the pines, completely free, completely peaceful, and finally home. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below so we know we're walking this journey together. Hope to see you on the next page.